האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobro Viecher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Pinchas. We're going to do Os Hey, section number 5. Before we begin, let's take a look at 2 psukim from our Parsha. These psukim come from the section towards the end of the Parsha where the Torah goes through the different Moadim, the holidays, the Chagim, and the Korbanos that were brought. And these specific psukim talk about at the end of the list of the animals that were brought as offerings on each day of the holiday of Sukkot. The Torah talks about Shmini Atzeres. So here's what the Torah says. This is Perek Chavtes Psukim Lamed Hey and Lamed Vav. By Yom Hashmini, on the 8th day, Atzeres Tiyeh Lochem. There should be a gathering for you or a holding back for you. Different ways to explain the word atzeres here. Kol meleches avoda lo sa'asu. All of the work of labor you should not do. V'hikravtem ola ishe reach nichoach lashem. And you should bring a sacrifice of a burnt offering sacrifice for Hashem, par echad, ayil echad, one bull, one ram, kivasim b'nei shona shiv'at timimim, and yearling sheep, 7 yearling sheep, which are timimim, which are without a blemish. So for the purpose of the Zera Shimshon, understanding this piece, we need to reflect on the fact that the Torah in the preceding psukim, before talking about Shmini Atzeres, listed the korbanos that were brought on each day. And each day, the amount of bulls was lessened by 1 bull. So on the first day of Sukkot, the Torah says, bring 13 bulls, 13 parim, and 2 rams, and 14 sheep. And then that's the first day of Sukkot. On the second day of Sukkot, bring 12 bulls and 2 rams and 14 sheep. And on the next day of Sukkot, bring 11. And each day, the amount of other animals was stayed the same, but the amount of parim of bulls decreased from 13 on the first day down each day to 7 on the 7th day of Sukkot. And then in the psukim that we just read, we see that it came all the way down to 1 bull for Shmini Atzeres, and the numbers of the other animals changed as well, 1 ram, 7 sheep. So Shmini Atzeres had a whole different setup in terms of psukim. But the idea of the korbanos, the numbers of bulls decreasing every day during the holiday of Sukkot, and then really the bottom dropping out, so to speak, really dropping off when it came to Shmini Atzeres, is going to be the starting point for the Zera Shimshon. Parsha Pinchas, section number 5, Os Hey. Medrash Rabbah. In the Medrash Rabbah, al pasuk, on the pasuk by Yom Hashmini Atzeres, on the 8th day, there should be a gathering or a holding over. The Medrash Rabbah says, Ma ra'a liyos poches v'holech b'chol yom. What did the Torah see that it diminished the number of korbanos each day during the holiday of Sukkot? Why did it come down, the number of rams, of parim, from 13 to 12 to 11? Why did each day, why was there 1 less ram brought as part of the korbanos? Limedcha Torah derech eretz men ha-korbanos, because the Torah is teaching proper etiquette, so to speak, from the korbanos. She'im yelech be'achsanya v'kiblo chavero, because if a person goes to be a guest in someone's home and his friend accepts him and welcomes him in as a guest, biyom rishon ma'achilo ofos, on the first day, he will serve poultry. He'll serve a very fine meal, v'chulei, etc. And the Medrash Rabbah goes through each day. On the next day, he'll serve something a little less fancy as the poultry. On the next day, he'll serve something even less. Ad shema'achilo kidnis, until on the last day of the visit, he'll serve him kitnios, which we know as legumes from Pesach fame. So this is considered something that a host would do. It's not exactly clear why a host would serve less fancy things or less delicious things each day of the visit. But the idea is start with the best, and then I imagine if a person can't afford to serve the best every day, so then they would diminish each day of the person's visit. So the first day would be the best, and the next day would be the next best, and it would keep decreasing until the least favored popular foods or the least fancy foods would be served on the last day of the visit. Then the Medrash Rabbah continues, Tihiyeh lochem. What does it mean in the pasuk when it says, "Bayom hashmini atzeres tihiyeh lachem"? The atzeres should be for you. Mahu tihiyeh lachem. What does the Torah mean by it should be for you? Amar lahem, Hashem said to them, meaning Bnei Yisrael, Hamoadim no'im lachem. The holidays are appropriate for you. Ad kan l'shono. Until here is a quote from the Medrash Rabbah. Next paragraph. V'hikshu ha'meforshim. The commentators ask, Diloma hiksha ha'medrash. Why does the Medrash, this excerpt that we just quoted from the Medrash Rabbah, why does it ask, Ma ra'a liyos poches? What did the Torah see that it went down in the number of korbanos al bayom hashmini on the pasuk about the eighth day? Hoyulo lehakshos zeh. Al pasuk v'hikravtem. The Medrash should have asked this question on the next pasuk that talks about the korbanos. D'semich le par echad ayil echad. The next pasuk after the pasuk of Bayom Hashmini on the eighth day, that you should have an Atzeres. The next pasuk talks about the korbanos that you bring on Shmini Atzeres, and that's when it comes all the way down to one bull and one ram. The numbers of korbanos drop off. The Mairi le'inyan hakorban. That pasuk talks about the number of korbanos. So the Zera Shimshon says the first question that we need to bring from the Meforshim, from the commentators, is, why did the Medrash ask the pasuk, address its question on the pasuk about Bayom Hashmini Atzeres Tihiyeh lachem, on the eighth day you should have an Atzeres, when it was the next pasuk that talks about the korbanos on Shmini Atzeres, where clearly we can see that their numbers dropped precipitously? Why didn't it ask its question about the decreasing korbanos on the next pasuk? Elevadai tzarech lomar, but definitely we need to say, shehamidrash hiktim hamauchar. The Medrash puts first something that should have come later. Bishvil lahakshos al tihiyeh lachem, in order to ask the question on the word should be for you. Dilo osi shapir lefi drashazo, because the words about it should be for you don't really fit with the whole drasha of derech eretz and decreasing the quality of the food during a guest's visit. V'tzorech iyon, and this requires analysis. Eich below drasha zo asi shapir tihiyeh lachem. How is it that without the words tihiyeh lachem, the drasha could fit? The achar drasha zo dafka, and it was after the drasha about tihiyeh lachem, yesh hakushya mahu tihiyeh lachem, that the Medrash Rabbah had a problem with the words of tihiyeh lachem. So this is getting, you may realize that this is getting a little tricky, because the Zera Shimshon is posing a question based on why the Medrash Rabbah asked its question on one pasuk as opposed to the next pasuk. And those kinds of questions are always a little tricky if you're not looking at the Chumash and if you haven't studied the Psukim. But just for simplicity's sake, and to make sure we understand the question, let's just quickly go back. So the Medrash came along and asked a question on the pasuk of Bayom Hashmini Atzeres Tihiyeh lachem, on the eighth day. There should be an Atzeres for you, and we, in fact, that's our holiday of Shmini Atzeres. And the Medrash then, on that pasuk, asked, why did the numbers of korbanos decrease? But that pasuk didn't mention anything about korbanos specifically. The next pasuk talked about the korbanos of Shmini Atzeres, and that pasuk clearly stated that the numbers of bulls dropped down to 1, and the numbers of rams dropped down to 1, and the number of sheep dropped down to 7. Clearly, all the amount of all the animals had dropped down. In the next is mentioned in the next pasuk. So the Zera Shimshon says it must be that the Medrash Rabbah wanted to ask its question not just about the number of korbanos, but on the words atzeres tiyeh lachem, there should be an atzeres for you, and therefore it had to address the pasuk with those words in the pasuk, and so it kind of jumped the gun and asked its question to interpret the pasuk one pasuk before it really would have made the most sense. And so the question is, why did it do that? And now let's continue in the next paragraph. V'sertzu heim, and the commentators answer, the below zeh, without this, hayisi omer, I would have said, shahaperu shel tihiyeh lochem, the explanation of the words, the atzeret should be for you, who kiperish hamedrash acher, is like the explanation given in a different statement in the Medrash Rabbah. Hey, view Rashi b'Parsha, and Rashi brings this other statement down in our Parsha, Parsha Pinchas, and here's a quote. At Motzei b'chol yemei hechag, you find that on all the days of the holiday of Sukkot, hikrivu parim keneged shivim umos, they brought bulls that corresponded in number to the 70 nations of the world, the 70 founding or fundamental basic nations of the world. That idea comes from the fact that if you count up the amount of parim, of bulls that were brought, starting with the 13 on the first day and going down to the 7 on the 7th day, again, all of that is before you get to the 8th day of Shmini Atzeres, you end up with 70, a total of 70 bulls that were brought during the holiday of Sukkot. So Chazal teach us that those 70 bulls correspond to the 70 umos ha'olam, the nations of the world. Those bulls were brought on behalf of the nations of the world. Uvayom hashmini hikrivu al atzmachem. And on the 8th day, Hashem says, now I want you to bring korbanos, not for the nations of the world, but for yourself. Moshel lemelech she'asa seuda, and the Medrash brings a parable about a king who made a big festive meal. Bayom acharo, and he invited a lot of people. And on the last day, he told everyone, this is it, it's over, time to go home. And then he said to Omar La'ohavo, the king said to his closest beloved friend, Negalgel ani va'ata, now that everyone has left, this last day, this extra day is for you and I to go around and and rejoice and celebrate together, right? So the Zera Shimshon says, if the medrash that we started off with about the person inviting a guest and starting off with the best food and then decreasing each day by the quality of the food, that if we didn't have that medrash, then we would have understood the psukim about the decreasing korbanos as based on another statement in Chazal in the Medrash Rabbah about the nations of the world and how the korbanos start with the parim specifically, the bulls specifically start with 13 on the first day of Sukkot, go down to 7 on the last day of Sukkot, and altogether they total 70 corresponding to the nations of the world. That's how we would have explained it. Omnam lefia medrash nizkar la'el. However, according to the first medrash about the derech eretz and the quality of the food, lo yitochen perush zeh. This explanation would not make sense. V'imkein mahu tihiyeh lachem. If so, what does it in fact mean to in the Torah when it says the atzeret should be for you? Now we definitely need to explain the question. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that we have two midrashim, and each medrash addresses the question of why the amount of bulls decreased day after day during a holiday of Sukkot. And the first medrash answers it based on this idea of the proper way to show hospitality to guests, where you start with the best food and then you come down each day to a lower quality of food. And the second medrash says a totally different concept, which is much more familiar to us. And that is the idea of the bulls representing the 70 nations of the world. And so the Zera Shimshon says, according to that explanation, the second medrash, the idea of Atzeres Tiel Lachem, this extra day at the end of Sukkot being tacked on, this 8th day, as a special holiday focusing only on the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people, makes perfect sense, because the 7 days of Sukkot, we were doing special things for the Umos HaOlam, for the 70 foundational nations of the world. And then Hashem says, okay, that's it. That's over. And now I want a day just devoted to my relationship with Klal Yisrael. And that's the day of Shmini Atzeres. Everything fits beautifully. But according to the first medrash that the Zera Shimshon opened with, why does this idea about hospitality and decreasing the quality of food, how does that fit in with Tiel Lachem? This Atzera should only be for you. What does that mean? The rest of the holiday was for the non-Jews, and the idea of hospitality to guests and how to decrease had something to do, distinguish between non-Jews and Jews. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. So we're basically, after everything the Zera Shimshon has said so far, we're basically left not understanding the first medrash and how it all fits together. The medrash, when I say the first medrash, the medrash brought in the first paragraph about the derech eretz and the decreasing quality of food. Next paragraph. We are now on the next page, column on the right. V'tzorech iyon. This requires analysis. Ma terutu zeh Shel hamoadim noim lachem. The medrash, which already we don't totally understand, the first one. Also, we don't understand what did it mean when it said that the reason the Torah says Tiel lachem Shmini Atzeres should be for you, meaning it should be for Klal Yisrael. The hamoadim noim lachem. All of the holidays are appropriate for you. What does that idea, all of the holidays are appropriate for you, have to do with the Medrash's whole theme about a guest and how to serve a guest, starting with the better food and going down to the least high quality food? V'od kasha, another question. For what reason did the Medrash say it means the holidays are appropriate for you? Why is it that the holidays are specifically appropriate for Klal Yisrael, but not for the Umos? What is it about the holidays that would make it impossible for them to apply to the nations of the world? Couldn't the nations of the world also celebrate these holidays? The point is not that they are mitzuvah, or that they're obligated to do so, but what is it about the nature of the Moadim that the Medrash wanted to make the point these holidays can only be properly celebrated by Klal Yisrael and not the Umos Olam? Had they been commanded to the Umos Olam, in other words, theoretically, hypothetically, the Medrash is saying the Umos Olam would not have handled the holidays well to the way that Klal Yisrael does. Why is that? V'od kasha, another question. V'chi adayin lo yoda amitos hatam shekosav bazohar sof Parshas Pinchas. Did the Medrash, was the Medrash truly unaware of the reason that's given in the Zohar about the decreasing number of korbanos during the holiday of Sukkot? Shekosav bazohar sof Parshas Pinchas, in the Zohar. This is written in the Zohar at the end of Parshas Pinchas. Shehar korbanos pochasin b'chol yom. The korbanos decrease every day. That just as we decrease the sacrifices, this should decrease the goodness that is being done for the Umos HaOlam. remez ladover, and a hint to this idea that the goodness that we're trying to accomplish for the umos should decrease over time is hinted to in the pasuk by the flood, by the mabul, v'hamayim hayu haloch v'chasor, and the water was getting less and less at the point after the rain stopped. They reached a point where the water covering the earth began to decrease. And over time, it decreased more and more until, of course, things dried up and Noach and his family could come out of the teva. V'ayin shom sheherich, and see over there in the Zohar that it speaks about this at length. So the Zera Shimshon is saying, he's posed a few questions on the Medrash Rabbah that he quoted in the first paragraph. And now he says, let's ask the most fundamental question, which is, why did it give this unusual, novel reason about derech eretz and decreasing the quality of the food for guests? Wasn't the Medrash aware of what the Zohar said on this exact same question, which is, why did the Torah decrease korbanos? Because even though we're bringing korbanos for the umos ha'olam, we're diminishing them to say, yes, we want these korbanos to bring kapara for the umos olam, and we want the umos olam to be blessed, but we want their blessings to decrease over time. We want the umos olam's power to be weakened over time. If the Medrash was aware of that statement in the Zohar, why did it feel the need to bring a new and unusual reason? Next paragraph. V'yesh lomar, and we can say shegam hu yodea zeh. The author of the Medrash Rabbah, of course, knew the reason in the Zohar. Aval kosher le al bayom hashmini. But the words bayom hashmini were difficult, presented a problem from the perspective of the author of the first excerpt in the Medrash Rabbah. The Vishlama bayom nicha. It's good that the Torah talked about Shmini Atzeres by saying bayom instead of uvayom, and on the day. Shehu nifrod mishar hayomim, which distinguished it from all of the other days, the bekulhu ksiv ubayom. Because if you look in the Torah, in our Parsha Pinchas, where the holiday of Sukkot is discussed, you'll see that it talks about Bayom HaRishon on the first day, and then Uvayom HaSheni, and Uvayom HaShlishi, and on the second day, and on the third day, which connects all of the days, because you're talking about the second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh day of the holiday of Sukkot. They all should be connected. But when you come to Shmini Atzeres, V'chan Ksiv Bayom, the Torah doesn't say Uvayom HaShmini, and on the eighth day. It just says Bayom HaShmini, on the eighth day, lahoros, to show she'ein shum shaychus udveikus liyisrael im ha'umos, to show that there's no connection whatsoever between Klal Yisrael and the umos. Since the 7 days of Sukkot, korbanos were brought on behalf of the umos. When Hashem gets to the eighth day, he doesn't say uvayom, and on the eighth day, which would connect it to the previous 7 days, but rather something new, something disconnected, and that is bayom hashmini, this eighth day, which is totally separate from the first 7 days. And because it shows the total separation between Klal Yisrael and the Umos HaOlam. Klal Yisrael are specifically dealt with on Shmini Atzeres. The Umos HaOlam have a role in the Korbanos for the 7 days of Sukkot. Aval Hashmini lo nicha. But the word the eighth doesn't fit. It's not comfortable. Shahare hu shem hamitztarefim hakodmim. When you talk about the eighth day, you can't escape. It's unavoidable that you're connecting that day to the previous 7 days. Because when you talk about the eighth day, you're saying there were 7 days, and now we're talking about the eighth day. There's a connection between the eighth day and the seventh day. Shahare hu shem hamitztarefim hakodmim. It connects you. V'hoyu lo lomar bayom shnayim ve'esrim b'chodesh. The Torah should not have referred to Shmini Atzeres as the eighth day, but rather as the 22nd day of the month. Meaning, if the Torah wanted to show us that there was truly a total separation between the eighth day, Shmini Atzeres, and the 7 previous days of the holiday of Sukkot, it should have said on the 22nd day of the month, there's a Atzeres, and that's called Shmini, and that's called the Chag HaAtzeres, not the Shmini Atzeres. It shouldn't have used Shmini or 8 at all, which automatically connects us to the previous 7 days. Kedei shelo litzaref klal Yisrael hima umos, in order to not make any connection between Klal Yisrael and the umos. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that the author of the Medrash Rabbah, the excerpt we looked at in the first paragraph, was bothered, was disturbed by the fact that the Torah referred to Shmini Atzeres as Bayom HaShmini, because that implies that Shmini Atzeres does have a connection to the previous 7 days. And since the previous 7 days represent the Umos Ha'olam from a certain perspective, and Shmini Atzeres represents just the relationship with Hashem and Klal Yisrael, there should be no connection. So why did the Torah make a connection? Next paragraph. Elevadai tzorech lomar, but definitely we need to say, She'im hoya omer hakasuv bayom shnayim ve'esrim lachodesh. Had the Torah, in fact, called Shmini Atzeres as the 22nd day of the month and not use the word Shmini at all, then the nations of the world would have been able to have a complaint against Klal Yisrael, the lisno osam, and to hate them, lefi, because, top of the next column, the nations of the world would have said, when you Jewish people bring sacrifices of bulls for us, as it states in Meseches Sukkah that we bring the bulls on behalf of the Umos Ha'olam, Eina Tova Shlema. The nations of the world would say, you're not really doing it in a full way. You're not doing it with a full heart. Elamida Chasera. But rather you're doing it with something missing. The Yeshlam Raya Gemura, and they could bring a complete, definite proof to this. Shebayom Hashmini Huvdulu Yisrael Mehem, because they would say that on Shmini Atzeres the Jews want to be considered totally separate from us, from the Umos Olam. They want to have a special day that has nothing to do with us because they don't really care for us. They don't really want to bless us. And we wouldn't have another explanation to respond with to the Umos Olam, Loma har korbanos pochasin v'holchin b'chol yom, why the korbanos, the amount of bulls, of parim, decrease every day. The only answer we could give them is the answer of the Zohar, which is to say, sorry, fellas, but we're bringing korbanos on your behalf, but you might notice that we're decreasing the number each day because we want your blessings to decrease each day. We want the power of these korbanos for you to be one less and diminish each day. And that's the only answer we could give the Umos Ha'olam. So that would be problematic. Next paragraph, Aval Ata, but now, Sha'omar HaKosuv Bayom Hashmini, when the Torah, so to speak, went out of its way to call Shmini Atzeres and refer to its date as on the 8th day, as opposed to referring to it as the 22nd day of the month, which it is, the 22nd day of Tishrei is Shmini Atzeres. It did not refer to it that way, which would have completely separated it from the holiday of Sukkot, but rather it referred to it as the 8th day, on the 8th day, Shenira Shekolel Yisraeli Mohem, which makes it appear that Klal Yisrael is being included on a certain level with the Umos Ha'olam. Al korchoch tzarech lomar, then you are compelled to say, sheyesh tam acher, there must be a different reason, an additional reason, loma ha-korbanos pochasin, why the sacrifices decrease each day during the holiday of Sukkot. Ubetam hahu, and according to that reason, which is the reason, of course, given in the first paragraph of this piece, Yecholim lihi kolel Yisrael umos. According to the reason that it's about derech eretz and how to treat a guest, then that applies to the Jewish people equally to the Umos Ha'olam. We can all learn, Jews and non-Jews alike can learn a proper etiquette in derech eretz as to give the best food on the first day of a visit by a guest and then decrease each day afterwards. Ve'enam yecholim od lehisra'im, and the Umos Ha'olam will no longer be able to have a complaint ula'arer and to start up Im Yisrael with Klal Yisrael. They won't have any legitimate beef to complain about. The Dilma Hatam Harishon Eino MS, because we can say perhaps the first reason isn't the true reason. We can say there's more than one reason in our sources as to why the korbanos, the number of korbanos, decrease each day. Umishum hachi shal hamedrash, and because of this, the Medrash Rabbah asked, Ma ra'a liyos poches v'cholech b'chol yom. What did the Torah see that it needed to decrease the number of bulls each day? Meaning, why did the Medrash Rabbah ask that question? It should have known the answer from the Zohar. And the Zera Shimshon says, because it was looking for an additional reason. It knew the reason. It knew the reason about decreasing the blessings for the Umos HaOlam, but it was looking for an additional reason that could be given and shared with the Umos HaOlam themselves as another way of understanding the diminishing korbanos, which would not cause problems. It's as if the Medrash had two different explanations about the diminishing. One is for internal proliferation. One is amongst ourselves. We can talk about the reason of decreasing the blessings and the protection of the Umos HaOlam. And the other reason is one which we can even share with the Umos HaOlam, because it will in no way offend their sensibilities. Next paragraph. And afterwards, that first, in the first paragraph of the Medrash Rabbah, it comes back and it asks, Mahu tieh lachem. What does it mean, according to this explanation that we're using about the derech eretz and the serving the guests? What does it mean it will be for you? Because the whole point is this idea is that Shmini Atzeres teaches, and Sukkot and Shmini teach lessons that we can share with the Umos Olam. So why does it say Dafka Shmini Atzeres should be for you? Shahare Noda, because it's known Shebechag HaSukkos Ba'im Ushpizin Elohim Imanu Basukah. It's known that during the holiday of Sukkot, heavenly guests come and visit us in the Sukkah. V'chisalka datoch lomar, and would you ever think to say she'af Yisrael yasu kach, that we should do the same thing about diminishing our hospitality? We have these wonderful guests, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc. Would we ever think that we need to make the first day of Sukkot the best, but then the second day not so good, and the third day even less? We have special, amazing guests every day of the holiday of Sukkot. How can we decrease anything? Does it make sense to say that each day of the holiday of Sukkot we should decrease the honor we show to the holiday? Does that really make sense? The Seirates and the Medrash Rabbah answers Adarabba, just the opposite. Hamoadim noim lahem. The Chagim are appropriate for you, Klal Yisrael, even though we have an explanation of the decreasing korbanos that isn't divisive, and it doesn't show differences. It doesn't highlight differences between Klal Yisrael and the Umos Olam. Nevertheless, there is a difference, and the difference is reflected in how we, Klal Yisrael, keep the Moadim. Shehem miskavnim lahosif b'chavod hamoed, because we know that we are trying to increase the honor as much as we can for each day of the holiday. Shebayomim harishonim he misadni me'at b'inyonei aguf. On the early days of the holiday, on Sukkot, we aren't focused as much on the physical enjoyment of the holiday, because we're celebrating a spiritual celebration of being able to fulfill the mitzvos of Sukkah and the Tilas Lulav and shaking the Lulav and the Arba Minim. That's where our main simcha is coming from. Of course, we have wonderful, delicious meals in the Sukkah, but we have our Ushpiz and our spiritual guests, and so they set the tone of spiritual celebration, and so we focus on the spiritual joy of being in the Sukkah and being Mekayim, fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkah and the mitzvah of shaking the Lulav, which it's also very important and special to do in the Sukkah. Uvayom ha'acharon, and we come to the last day, meaning Shmini Atzeres, Adarabba, then just the opposite, meaning we turn away from just focusing on spiritual or primarily on spiritual, Mosif and Bisanug, and we add with physical pleasure and joy for Shmini Atzeres, Kidisnan beperik oso ve'espino, as it's taught in a Mishnah in Maseches Chulin, Be'arba prakim bashana, at 4 different times in the year, v'chule, etc. What it says is at 4 different times in the year, we have to be very careful when we're selling and are buying animals, especially in the big animal markets. You have to be very careful because there's so many people buying animals at these 4 times to slaughter the animals and have extra meat, tremendous amounts of meat to celebrate during each of these 4 different times. The Eluhain, and these are the 4 times, and the Zera Shimshon only lists our relevant example. Erev Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shel Chag. It's on Erev Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, meaning on the last day of Sukkot. The Mishnah in Chulin taught that when people came to buy animals, and you have so many people buying animals to slaughter and eat meat in tremendous abundance on Shmini Atzeres, you had to be careful about the prohibition of sacrificing an animal and its child on the same day. So people actually would ask and inquire, and sellers would point out, be very careful because I sold the mother of this animal earlier today, and so you can't sacrifice this animal today. For tomorrow, you would have to wait till tomorrow to be able to sacrifice this animal, and so that idea that so many animals were being purchased and slaughtered because there was such a huge abundance of consumption of meat and preparations for the holiday was told to us as one example of the 4 examples for Shmini Atzeres, and that shows us that that's when the physical celebration of the holiday comes to the forefront, as opposed to the spiritual celebration that we have during Sukkot. Again, yes, absolute mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov and celebrating Sukkot with delicious, wonderful meals and amazing food, but we have to always remember that we have special spiritual celebration with our mitzvos of Sukkah and Lulav, which only apply on Sukkot, of course, and not on Shmini Atzeres. And so when Shmini Atzeres comes, we shift over to focusing more on the physical and even more special meals on Shmini Atzeres. So the Zera Shimshon has introduced us to 2 very different approaches in Chazal, reflected in 2 different midrashim from the Medrash Rabbah, and the second piece goes along with the Zohar. The first one gives an entirely different reason, and he has shown us how one, as we mentioned, is for internal purposes because it highlights the difference between the Jewish people and the Umos HaOlam, and the fact that even though we're bringing korbanos for them, we want their strength to weaken over time. And the other one tries not to distinguish between, it focuses on a similarity between the Umos HaOlam and Klal Yisrael, and is not divisive. But even in that Medrash Rabbah, it makes the subtle point that the Umos HaOlam do not know how to distinguish, for example, during one holiday, Sukkot followed by Shmini Atzeres, the way that we understand how to distinguish so that each day gets its proper kavod and gets its proper focus. Yasher Koach for joining us in the Zera Shimshon this week. God willing, we look forward to learning together in the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha.